medical and healthcare. And we would remind all parties of their obligation to ensure that this aid directly reaches the civilians that need it in accordance with the provisions of the resolutions adopted by this Council. And following the unjustified attacks of Hamas against Israeli civilians on that awful 7th of October, and their insistence on attacking Israeli territory and its population, this is counterproductive, and we don't understand the strategy of Hamas in refusing to release the Israeli hostages that it is keeping in captivity, and that it should never have taken in the first place, without showing any political will for finding realistic political conditions to achieve an agreement that would put an end to the cycle of violence. This is just suicidal. Suicide means taking away your own life, however, but in Gaza, Hamas, what it's doing is sacrificing other people's lives, men, women, children, innocent people amongst the Palestinian population of Gaza. President, with regard to the aforementioned, Panama reaffirms its commitment to the principles of the United Nations Charter, and we regret the loss of civilian life, as well as any other violation of international law and international humanitarian law. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Panama for their statement, and I now give the floor to the representative, the permanent observer of the Observer State of Palestine. You have the floor, sir.
Thank you, Mr. President. Allow me at the outset to congratulate the Brotherly Republic of Algeria on assuming the presidency of the Security Council for this month. We wish you every success. I would like to thank you for your tireless international effort in defense of the Palestinian people and its just cause, especially in light of the continued colonial Israeli illegal occupation and the continued massacres by this Israeli occupation against our civilians. We have learned from your experience, Mr. President, and from your glorious Algerian revolution, and from the experiences of peoples under the brunt of colonization and occupation, a testament of history that occupation and colonization are bound to end, and that freedom and independence is not just wishful thinking. It will be a reality no matter how long it takes. We have ended the year 2024 with Palestine, and we start the year of 2025 with Palestine under the presidency of Algeria, and this is quite normal. The Security Council must end this aggression immediately and without condition.
At the start of this year, I also wish to convey our sincere congratulations to the elected members of the Security Council now taking forth their responsibilities: Denmark, Greece, Pakistan, Panama, and Somalia. As proven in the past year, the elected members have a very important role to play in ensuring the Council upholds its charter duties, and we assure them of our full cooperation. We also thank the briefers, the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, Volker Turk, Dr. Richard Peppercorn of the WHO, and Dr. Tanya Haj Hassan for their important briefings and compelling testimonies to the Council. I listened today Dr. Haj Hassan, as I listened to you at the end of November, when you addressed the United Nations during the International Day of Solidarity with the Palestinian people. You are a great humanitarian, and you are very faithfully were able to convey some of the messages of the Palestinian people from the Gaza Strip, from the heart of a super humanitarian to the minds and hearts of those who are responsible for the maintenance of international peace and security. On behalf of the Palestinian people, I thank you, and on behalf of the people, our people, especially in the Gaza Strip, I thank you very much. Mr. President, the image of Dr. Hussam Abu Safiya wearing his white gown medical overcoat, symbol of hope and humanity, summoned and walking towards Israeli tanks, embodying death and destruction, will remain forever a reflection of what is at stake in Gaza. Humanity itself, it will show a people standing up against all odds in the face of terrible suffering, trauma, and death. And it will show how lonely they were in that moment. Palestinian doctors and medical personnel are fighting to save human lives and losing their own. They are fighting a battle they cannot win, and yet they are unwilling to surrender and to betray the oath they took. They are trying to save lives while hospitals are under attack, while medical personnel are, together with their patients and people seeking shelter, besieged and killed, while buildings and wards, even for mothers and newborn babies, are being destroyed, while access to medicine is being denied, while electricity is cut, while starvation is imposed, and while they know that the people they are trying to heal will most probably die, and that they, the doctors, will be held responsible by Israel for the ultimate crime of trying to preserve life in Gaza, and will be detained, tortured, and even killed. And yet, they continue trying. Dr. Mahmoud Abu Nujila, who was killed in an Israeli airstrike on Al-Auda Hospital, wrote a message many months ago on a whiteboard in the hospital normally used for planning surgeries. And I quote him, whoever stays until the end will tell the story. We did what we could. Remember us. Remember us. We owe them more than remembrance. Nothing can explain that for 15 months Palestinians in Gaza have endured hell and been abandoned to this fate. Nothing justifies that the doctors who were trying to save lives of victims have become themselves the victims, and that the international community was not able to match even part of their courage and of their dedication to humanity. Dr. Adnan Al-Bursh wrote, and I quote, "We will die standing, and we will not kneel. All that remains in the valley are its stones, and we are its stones." End of quotation. Dr. Adnan Al-Bursh was the head of orthopedics at Gaza's Al-Shifa Hospital. He became a familiar face across the globe as his videos showed him operating on the injured and the dying with little or no equipment, or digging mass graves with his colleagues in the yard of the hospital, and finally facing the Israeli assault in a hospital where thousands had sought safety. The Israeli army ordered Al-Shifa, its patients, staff, and approximately 50,000 displaced people sheltering in the compound to evacuate before setting the hospital on fire. Instead of fleeing, Dr. Al-Bursh made his way to the Indonesian hospital in northern Gaza, where he worked until that too came under fire in November. But refusing to renege on his oath, he moved to Al-Auda hospital, where he was eventually arrested by the Israeli occupation forces. 4 months later, over-prison guards dragged Al-Bursh and dumped him in the prison yard, naked from the waist down, bleeding and unable to stand, according to a deposition collected by Israeli human rights organizations. He died shortly thereafter. The death of Dr. Al-Bursh while in Israeli custody is not a solitary case. Other doctors and many other detainees died while in custody after having suffered from abuse, torture, and rape. Mr. President, this is not a war, and Dr. Tonya has indicated. This is an assault against Palestinian existence. Its target is therefore life itself in Gaza, and all those who are trying to sustain it, all those trying to ensure survival in the midst of this genocide. And according to this criminal intent, it is therefore logical that medical personnel, doctors, nurses, paramedics are among its primary victims. This is immoral. I repeat, this is immoral, unbearable, and must be stopped. The entirety of international humanitarian law rests on a fundamental rule: affording protection to those not taking part or no longer taking part in hostilities. First and foremost, civilians, the sick and the wounded and those detained. Instead of upholding the cardinal principle of distinction, Israel systematically resorts to indiscriminate attacks when it does not deliberately target those afforded protection under international law. Time after time, the same acts, the same patterns, the same criminal and inhumane conduct. Assaults against hospitals leading to the death and detention of civilians, including babies and children who are already experiencing hell on earth. No one should grow accustomed to these horrors. Israel wants to normalize genocide. The report of OHCHR clearly indicates that, and I quote, "the attacks on hospitals often followed a similar pattern involving missile strikes on hospital buildings, the destruction of hospital facilities, shooting of civilians, sieges, as well as temporarily taking over hospital buildings. End of quotation. And this is without addressing, again, and I quote, the many cases of arbitrary detention, enforced disappearance, and ill treatment of medical personnel and other Palestinians, including internally displaced persons, IDPs, taken into custody from inside hospitals, which has been reported on elsewhere. End of quotation. This is a barbaric, and it should lead not only to repeated expression of outrage, but rather to resolute action for accountability to prevent the reoccurrence of such horrors. As warned by UN experts, and I quote, under occupation, intentional assaults on healthcare facilities have the potential to expose individuals to cruel, inhumane, and degrading treatment, and many constitute a war crime. In Gaza, this is clearly part of a well-established pattern of genocide for which Israel leaders will have to be held accountable. End of quotation. There is no justification for the commission of war crimes. There is no justification for the commission of crimes against humanity. There is no justification for the commission of the crime of genocide. No justification whatsoever. The ICJ provisional measures, orders aimed at preserving the right of the Palestinian people to be protected from acts of genocide, have not only been disregarded by Israel, they have been blatantly breached, materializing the risk instead of addressing it. Mr. President, Israeli action can only be understood in the context of the real goals of this war. Remember, we talked about the report of the generals, which we don't talk about it anymore. Israeli officials and military commanders have often confessed to them. For anyone willing to hear, some they don't want to hear. They like to hear what they like to hear. Israeli occupation soldiers described the actions and instructions of their division chief, division commander of Division 252, Brigadier General Yehuda Vach, stated to Haaretz that his aim was to flatten as much of Gaza as possible to forcibly displace some 250,000 Palestinians who were still present in northern Gaza to take over the land. He's building a private militia from settlers, from relatives, from fanatic soldiers to destroy every day 50, 60 buildings in the Gaza Strip, not to allow Gaza being a place for a single Palestinian to live in it. He was clear that they needed to, and I quote, according to Haaretz, make things hard on convoys that entered and harassed them. Not only there are thieves who steal the trucks, the Israeli soldiers are watching and facilitating this behavior. Insisting, and I continue the quotation, there are no innocents in Gaza. For those of you who think that this is a war against Hamas and not against the Palestinian people, a general, brigadier general, currently in the Israeli army, head of Division 252, there are no innocents in Gaza. Free game. Every individual in the Gaza Strip, the Palestinian people. But his greatest insanity in the words of one officer of the occupation army, and I quote, was the one about moving the Gazans southward and taking land, as much land as possible. End of quotation. It is a war against the Palestinian people. It is a war of genocide to eliminate as many as possible and to allow the situation in Gaza to be not inhabitable by any individual. They don't want Palestinians in the Gaza Strip and later on in other parts of the occupied territory. Evacuation orders and destruction of civilians' infrastructures, including hospitals, and killings and maiming of civilians, including doctors, have to be understood in this context. Either the Palestinians are displaced or they are destroyed. There is no other option, ethnic cleansing or genocide, and for the time being, it has meant both. Mr. President, the images are out there for all to see of repeated assaults against our hospitals as part of the assault on Palestinian life and Palestinian existence. You can see such assaults also in the West Bank by the Israeli occupation forces. They keep claiming the use of human shields. They say Hamas used the people in Gaza as human shields, saying how outrageous it is for combatants to use human shields or to pretend to be civilians when their occupation forces have done both repeatedly. With occupation forces sometimes disguised as civilians, as patients, even pretending to be pregnant women seeking care with her relatives, have conducted military raids against and within hospitals. That is their behavior. For those who try to lecture to you that others are using civilians and human shields, these evidence, these stories were documented and some were caught in the action. We salute all medical practitioners from around the world who have volunteers to help our people in Gaza, as well as all those who have expressed solidarity and provided support to their colleagues in Palestine. Your moral voices give hope to the Palestinian people and all those who cherish and seek to preserve humanity. Everyone needs to choose if they stand by hope and humanity as embodied by the white coat worn by doctors around the world, or if they stand with destruction and death. And those who say they have made the right choice need to act accordingly. Mr. President, Dr. Hussam Abu Safiyyah stated a few weeks before this ultimate assault on the Kamal Udwan Hospital, and I quote, "I refuse to leave the hospital and sacrifice my patients. So the army punished me by killing my son. I saw him die at the entrance gate of the hospital. It was a great shock. I found a grave for him near one of the hospital's walls so that he could stay close to me." End of quotation. Dr. Abu Safiyyah was himself injured, and now he has been abducted, detained, his fate unknown. He refused to leave the victims behind. Can't we display some degree of that same courage? The plight of Dr. Hussam Abu Safiyyah, who must be immediately released, is but one story from Gaza, among an infinite number of stories of unimaginable loss and trauma, and ache and suffering, and courage and resilience. A story of a people who, while receiving solidarity of peoples and countries around the world, feel abandoned to a terrible fate, enduring a never-ending hell. It is our collective responsibility to bring this hell to an end. It is our collective responsibility to bring this genocide to an end. We have a duty to save lives. This Council, you, have an obligation to save lives. Palestinian doctors and medical personnel took that mission to heart at the peril of their lives. They did not abandon the victims. Do not abandon them. End Israeli impunity. End the genocide. End this aggression immediately and unconditionally now. And I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the permanent observer of the Observer State of Palestine for their statement. The Presidency of the Security Council will now give the floor to the representative of Israel.
Mr. President, the Middle East stands today at a critical juncture. With continued Houthi attacks against civilians in Israel and in the Red Sea, Syria's precarious position following the fall of the brutal Assad regime, the ongoing firing of rockets by Hamas, again just yesterday at Be'eri, where Israeli civilians were massacred on the 7th of October 2023, and 100 hostages still being held captive by Hamas terrorists. The Presidency called for an emergency session today, not to deal with these threats and challenges, and not to condemn terrorists blatantly violating international law by exploiting hospitals as the basis of military activity. Such actions negatively impact the credibility of the Council and the international system. Hospitals are meant to be sanctuaries of care and compassion. Yet Hamas has transformed them into tools for terror, exploiting their sanctity to shield its murderous aims and wage war against civilians. This is not an isolated tactic or an act of desperation. This is a deliberate and systematic strategy, a cornerstone of Hamas's operational doctrine, their modus operandi. Though we have known this for many years, the past 15 months have exposed the depth of Hamas's depravity. In November 2023, IDF troops exposed a 55-meter-long terror tunnel, 10 meters deep underneath the Shifa hospital complex, along with massive caches of weapons throughout the tunnel and the hospital. In that same month, at the Indonesian hospital, IDF forces identified a white Toyota truck used during the massacre of October 7th, located within the hospital compound. Additionally, a vehicle with an Israeli license plate and bloodstains, later linked to a hostage, was found in the hospital area. In February 2024, the IDF uncovered a network of terror tunnels connecting the Turkish hospital in Gaza City to nearby operational facilities. These tunnels allowed Hamas operatives to move weapons and personnel discreetly, all the while exposing and exploiting the civilian infrastructure of the hospital. In March 2024, the IDF revealed dozens of weapons, millions of dollars in blood money, and hundreds of operatives once again inside Shifa Hospital. We found further video footage proving that Hamas took hostages to Al-Shifa following the October 7th attack, and that the hostage Noah Marciano was murdered by a Hamas terrorist within the hospital walls. Just 4 days ago, on December 30th, Hamas operatives were caught on camera planting explosives a mere 45 meters from the Indonesian hospital in northern Gaza. And now, Kamal Adwan Hospital has become the latest site exploited by Hamas, a grim addition to their well-documented and public history of abusing civilian infrastructure. This Council must confront this undeniable reality. Hamas does not respect the sanctity of hospitals, schools, or places of worship. It uses them to protect its terrorists, store its weapons, and launch its attacks. It uses civilian population as human shields, playing on the instinct to protect the vulnerable. At Kamal Adwan Hospital, Hamas turned a facility for healing into a command center for terror. Since October 2024, following an IDF operation in the area, Hamas entrenched itself in the hospital, embedding its military infrastructure and operational hubs within its walls. Despite repeated calls by Israel to cease the unlawful military use of the hospital since the start of the operation in October, these warnings were again ignored and disregarded. This week's precise operation by the IDF revealed the extent of Hamas's abuse of the facility. Over 240 terrorists were apprehended, including 15 who participated in the October 7th massacre, the darkest day in Israel's modern history, where over 1,200 lives were brutally taken by the terrorists. Among those apprehended was the hospital director himself, who is suspected of being a Hamas operative, as hundreds of Hamas and Islamic Jihad terrorists were hiding inside the Kamal Adwan hospital under his management. He is currently being investigated by Israeli security forces. Colleagues, this operation was not a choice, it was a necessity. It was conducted based on extensive intelligence gathered over months, confirming Hamas's activities on hospital premises. In accordance with international humanitarian law, the IDF has implemented comprehensive measures to mitigate harm to civilians. Prior to this operation, Israel facilitated the evacuation of 350 patients, caregivers, and medical staff from the hospital, along with the delivery of tens of thousands of liters of fuel, hundreds of food parcels, and critical medical supplies to sustain hospital operations. As the operation progressed, an additional 95 patients, staff, and caregivers were safely transferred to the Indonesian hospital. This included the provision of 5,000 liters of fuel, 2 generators, and essential medical equipment to maintain the critical systems and ensure uninterrupted care. Israel continues to cooperate with the international community to strengthen the medical response capabilities at the Indonesian hospital. Additionally, the IDF worked with the director of Kamal Adwan Hospital to ensure the facility was vacated from patients and other civilians prior to the commencement of its precise operation. The operation uncovered caches of weapons, including grenades, firearms, ammunition, and other military equipment hidden within the hospital grounds. As IDF forces operated nearby, they faced attacks from Hamas operatives firing anti-tank missiles and RPGs. This is the stark contrast between Israel and Hamas. While Hamas endangers civilians, Israel protects them, even at the risk of our own personnel's lives. Hamas's exploitation of hospitals is not only a moral abomination, but a blatant violation of international law, and far too often, the international response has been silence. On October 17, 2023, when an explosion rocked Al Ali Hospital, many in this chamber and around the world rushed to pass judgment, parroting casualty figures provided by Hamas terrorists. Those numbers were grossly inflated, and the explosion was caused not by Israel, but by a misfired Islamic Jihad rocket. Yet the damage was done. Hamas's propaganda had achieved its goal. This council cannot afford to repeat those mistakes. It must not allow itself to be manipulated by those who weaponize the truth. It must maintain its dignity and credibility. Israel's actions exemplify its commitment to international humanitarian law and principles. Despite the challenges of protecting itself against an enemy that hides behind civilians, Israel continues to uphold its obligations. Over the past month alone, Israel has facilitated the medical evacuation of over 1,000 patients and caregivers from Gaza for life-saving treatments in 13 countries. These efforts reflect a fundamental truth. Even as it faces relentless terror, Israel remains committed to preserving life. Distinguished Council members, the issue at hand extends beyond Israel and Hamas. It strikes at the heart of international norms and the principles that govern this Council. If hospitals can be turned into terror bases without consequences, if civilians can be used as shields with impunity, what does that say about the state of international law? What message does this send to other terror groups around the world? This is a test, not just for Israel, but for the Council and for the global community. Will we stand by as the sanctity of medical institutions is eroded? Will we allow Hamas to set a precedent where the protection of civilians becomes a shield for terror? This Council must act decisively. It must condemn Hamas's actions in the strongest terms. It must recognize that Israel's operations are not only a response to terror, but offense to the principles that underpin this institution. Israel will continue to protect its citizens, uphold its commitments under international law, and do all it can to bring the hostages home. but the Council must meet its own obligations. It must protect the innocent, fight for the release of the hostages alongside us, uphold the rule of law, and hold accountable those who seek to weaponize human suffering and civilian infrastructure. I thank you.
The Presidency of the Security Council thank the representative of Israel for their statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Egypt.
Thank you, Mr. President. The delegation of Egypt is honored to deliver the statement of the Arab Group today. The Arab Group would like to congratulate Algeria on assuming the presidency of the Security Council. We look forward to working with the 5 new members and the remaining members of the Security Council. We thank you, Mr. President, for holding today's meeting to discuss Israeli attacks against healthcare facilities in the Gaza Strip. We also thank the briefers for their sobering briefings. Mr. President, Israel once again is displaying a new level of brutalities in its crimes. After targeting civilians and killing over 45,000 martyrs, 70% of them women and children, it has destroyed the civilian infrastructure in the Gaza Strip. It has killed hundreds of UN personnel and humanitarian workers. Now, Israel is targeting in a barbaric way the Palestinian healthcare system. It has launched a campaign of murder and destruction against hospitals, healthcare facilities, and medical personnel. And the latest chapters has been the destruction of the Kamal Adwan Hospital in North Gaza. It has become non-operational. And they have arrested its medical personnel alongside a number of patients. Mr. President, to understand the scale of the catastrophe as a result of the destruction of the Kamal Adwan Hospital, we refer to the WHO statement dated 28 December 2024, which clearly illustrates that this last major healthcare facility is now non-operational. It has also referred to the systematic dismantling of the healthcare system and the siege laid by Israel on North Gaza for over 80 days, which is now jeopardizing the life of 75,000 Palestinians that are still in the area. The efforts of WHO and its partners have failed, and therefore this lifeline for health in Gaza is now on the verge of collapse. Furthermore, the report of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, dated 31st December 2024, highlighted the catastrophic repercussions of Israeli attacks against hospitals in Gaza, which has pushed the healthcare system to the brink of collapse, making it impossible to access basic treatment that is life-saving or to access safe locations. The destruction of the healthcare system in Gaza, in addition to the restrictions imposed by Israel on the entry and distribution of medical supplies, has led to the deterioration of the health situation, has created a medical catastrophe. This is now a collective suffering. Facts, Mr. President, show that there are no evidence supporting the claims of Israel that these hospitals are being used for other purposes. Therefore, we reaffirm the obligations of Israel as the occupying power to provide medical and health services as well as medical supplies and food to the citizens of Gaza and to approve relief plans. We also highlight the shortcomings of the Israeli justice system. When it comes to the behavior of Israeli forces, it is important to carry out independent, transparent investigations and to hold accountable those who violated international humanitarian law and international human rights law. Israel continues to perpetrate one crime after the other. They're boasting about these crimes and justifying them because there has been no deterrent punishment. There has been no determination from the international community to implement UN resolutions, to put an end to the violations of international humanitarian law and the laws of the war. Israel is facing the following question: why not perpetrate another crime? Why not? The answer is known to Israel. It has therefore completed its plan to turn the Gaza Strip into an uninhabitable area, to empty it from the basic components of human life through a repeated and varied series of crimes, the latest of which is unfolding before our eyes, which is the destruction of the medical system in the Gaza Strip, with one main objective: to implement the systematic policy of forceful displacement by Israel to kill and liquidate the Palestinian cause. Mr. President, the Arab Group values the efforts of the Qatari-Egyptian mediation in partnership with the U.S. mediator to reach a ceasefire. We reaffirm the following steps as the only solution to the crisis. First, the Security Council must adopt a resolution under Chapter 7 for an immediate, unconditional ceasefire in the Gaza Strip, the delivery of assistance to put an end to the forceful displacement policy that aims to liquidate the Palestinian cause. Second, the Security Council must compel Israel through all political and legal means to implement Security Council resolutions, General Assembly resolutions, and the provisional measures issued by the ICJ since the beginning of the crisis, and to compel Israel to provide assistance to save civilians from the risk of famine. Third, the Security Council must shoulder its responsibilities pursuant to the UN Charter to compel Israel to stop attacking hospitals, civilian objects, to immediately release medical personnel and the patients that it has detained, to provide protection to them pursuant to international conventions, including Security Council Resolution 2286. Fourth, accountability for repeated Israeli crimes, especially those against hospitals, doctors, and patients. These has been the most heinous manifestation of ongoing Israeli crimes in Gaza since October 2023. Israel must cooperate with international tribunals to prosecute the perpetrators of these crimes. Fifth, all countries which respect international law must immediately suspend exporting weapons and ammunition used by Israel in this massacre for over 16 months so that you can deprive Israel from these tools of murder. Mr. President, members of the Security Council, once again, the Arab Group is wondering about the reason that prevents you from putting an end to this war against civilians. Why is the international community unable to put an end to the daily killing of Palestinians? We all wonder, how long will we continue to watch these horrendous scenes in Gaza? How long will you continue to deal with Arabs, the Palestinian people, and the citizens of Gaza as if they were not equal to other people around the world? Would you have allowed this massacre to continue for this time if it was perpetrated against another people in the developed world? Will you allow the bombing of hospitals and the killing of tens of thousands of children? Would you have allowed these scenes of famine, the cries of patients? Would you have tolerated these severe violations of international law? Mr. President, Israel must know fully well that all these crimes perpetrated against the Palestinian people will not push Palestinians to leave their homeland. It will not push Arabs or other peace-loving countries to abandon the Palestinians and the Palestinian cause, which is our cause. The Arab Group reaffirms that history bears witness that right and justice will prevail despite all the Israeli aggression, attacks, and violations. The Palestinian people will ultimately establish their independent state with East Jerusalem as its capital. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of Egypt for their statement. There are no more names inscribed on the list of speakers. The meeting is adjourned.